Durability plays a massive part when it comes to investing in a running shoe, but which one's holding up the best after a big amount of miles? Is it the Brooks Hyperion Max or is it the Asics Novablast 3? A question I always get asked when it comes to running shoes is, how long do you think they'll last? Well, today I've got two daily trainers and some big mileage milestones that I'm pitting against each other to show you guys which one is holding up the best. Now, it's stating the obvious, but yes, this one has more miles than this one, but they've both reached some big milestones. And as I've now retired the Brooks Hyperion Max, I thought it'd be a great time to pit these two together and showcase these two great daily trainers. Which one's holding up best at the mileage? And do I think that the Novablast 3 is going to go past the 415 mile mark? And to answer that question about the Novablast, we've got to look at why I've ended up retiring the Brooks Hyperion Max and 415 miles. And I am just going to state that I'm really happy that I've managed to get to 415 miles in this shoe, because the previous Brooks Hyperion Tempo that I had, which I own two pairs of because I love them so much, I only ever ended up getting them to around the 350 mile mark, roughly, because the midsole just completely flattened out and it went as hard as a rock. So that's what I was expecting in this shoe. But when it got past the 400 mile mark and the midsole was still going strong, I was really surprised. However, in the last few runs, I did notice a slight lack of structure to the shoe. What I was finding was my right leg was really collapsing in. And the slower the pace I was ended up running in the shoe, the sloppier that form would become, the sloppier my leg would be. I always find them more efficient, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do, when I'm running a little bit faster. You feel a bit smoother, gram contact times less, and you can go through that gait cycle really nicely. As I was running slower in it in some easy runs, I noticed my right leg collapsing in, my knee buckling in, which is my weaker side. And when I was slowing down some of the footage to have a look, I was really realizing just how drastic that collapse in was. Then the icing on the cake ended up being at the back of my long run last weekend. I just did have some tightness in and around the right knee, which sometimes used to happen when I used to get shoes to such a point where they were absolutely no good. I always used to live by the rule of, as soon as a shoe starts to cause me pain, that's when I'm retiring them. I've stepped away from that rule now, and I kind of try and retire shoes slightly earlier than that, so I never get to that stage and have to battle any muscle tightness or anything like that shoe might have caused. But this one, I think I've pretty much got it to that point, which is why I've had to step away from it, which is a shame, because as I said, the midsole in this seems to be superior to what we saw in the Tempo. Although they state there's not much difference, the fact that I've managed to get so many more miles out of it is incredible. And obviously the fact that it's not compressed at all or gone super hard is a really positive sign. So with that being said about the Brooks Hyperion Max, what do I think about the Novablast 3? Well, if I was to go off the previous two versions, I'd absolutely say, yep, hands down, no question, the Novablast will fly past that mileage. I got the version 1 to 400 miles and the version 2 to 500, and easily they could have kept going. They were just retired because I had other shoes in that I needed to get some miles in, and I used both of those shoes post running to walk around in them for another 6 to 12 months, and they were great. So there was no hesitation there. They could have easily kept going. With the evolution of the Novablast though, and the version 3 being so different, I guess that puts a few question marks over whether it will get to that point or not. Now, if you see my recent 300 mile video and updates on the shoe, you'll know that the only thing I'm complaining about, or have noticed I should say, after the duration of 300 miles is some tears in the fabric at the back there and a lot of slickness going on in the rubber outsole. But neither of those two things are necessarily reasons to retire a shoe, because the hole in the back there doesn't make any difference to the performance whatsoever. And the rubber outsole then depends on the shoe itself, because I've had shoes that have worn down, like my Vaporfly version 1, which become very dicey to run in. You've got to corner a little bit wider. You've just got to be really careful because they do become very slick. And although this has gone completely bold in some areas in the middle and across the top here, namely in this section and across the top, I'm not finding any performance issues. I'm not feeling unsafe in the shoe, and I'm certainly not feeling like I'm having to corner extra wide or be careful in any way, shape or form. The main reasons that I end up retiring shoes tend to be down to the midsole itself and the structure, as I've just talked about in the Hyperion Max. And at this point at 300 miles, the midsole is doing just fine. So then all I can do at this point is predict whether I think this thing will get up and over it. And if we're talking about the previous two midsoles, I'd say absolutely, as I've just said. But with the version 3, with it being a lighter compound, still as bouncy but much lighter, which is end up shaving so much weight off the shoe and interestingly completely changed the way that a lot of people use it. It is different, and so I don't have that much experience. I put my money on it if it was the other two, but I was still going to say I'm going to put my money on the fact that this thing will go up and over the 415 mile mark. Whether I'll actually get there or not is another thing, but I think at this point, after 300 miles, it still feels as bouncy, it still feels really good. I haven't found that much deterioration in terms of performance, and I still feel like it's a really enjoyable shoe to lace up and go out for a run in. So I guess that then comes down to the question of, this thing is going to be more durable, that's my prediction anyway, and I feel like it's going to last longer. I do still feel like this thing could be a 400-500 mile shoe, and I feel like it's going to hold up better than it is the Brooks Hyperion Max. But which do I prefer? And actually, which one have I used more? And which one would I buy again if someone said to me, if you can have one of these shoes, which one would you buy again? And I would choose the Hyperion Max. It's a bit of a shocker actually, because the version 1 and version 2 are absolutely incredible. And these are both daily trainers in my opinion, both shoes that you can do a range of paces in and a range of runs. But I am finding myself gravitating more towards the firmer midsole shoes, especially for those longer distance runs. In terms of weight, this is heavier naturally, but not a huge amount heavier. But I find that this thing is something that I can use on the same variety of runs as this, but I just enjoy it a little bit more. The firmer midsole means that as the duration of the run goes on, I don't feel like I'm sinking. I don't feel like I'm swimming against the tide when I get a little bit tired. This thing just keeps on giving and giving and giving, and it just doesn't give up. Whereas in softer midsoles, this thing, the Endorphin Speed 3, those type of shoes, I often find like after an hour, hour and a half, I can find like I feel like my legs are feeling a little bit heavy, a little bit weighty, and you're kind of like running through treacle. It can feel a little bit more difficult to keep up that cadence and keep up that performance. This thing has never let me down. This thing got me through a full marathon block. I did marathon workouts, long runs, shorter, sharper workouts and everything. So if I'm being completely honest with you, I'd rather pay a little bit more money for a shoe that's a little bit less durable, but that's going to give me the performance that I need during a big training block. So I guess the question then comes down to you guys, because this is obviously just my opinions, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of these two shoes if you've been lucky enough to try them. In terms of durability, you know the Novablast 3 I think is going to outpip the Brooks Hyperion Max, but from a performance perspective, I never thought I'd say it because I love my Novablast, but this thing has been better in all scenarios, and it's something I've preferred and something I've gravitated towards, to the point where, as I've talked about in previous videos, I actually put the Novablast 3 down for a period of time during marathon training as I was trying to work on my cadence and work on something in a little bit of a firmer shoe. I'm getting to the point where I prefer firmer shoes, and I'm finding that the softer, squishier stuff is fine in small bursts, but I prefer a little bit of a firmer midsole because I just find the structure is a lot better in those shoes. It helps me as a runner, and I think it helps performance, especially as I'm going over those longer distances and don't feel quite like I'm sinking in. So durability, this thing wins. Performance, this thing wins. And I guess that then comes down to you guys as to what you guys think with these two shoes. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter and what your closest matchups that you find in your running shoe rotation are. If you've only got one of these shoes, whether it's the Hyperion Max or the Novablast 3, let people in the comments below know what your closest competitor is and where they stack up and how you find them. Which ones do you prefer? If you've got both of them, it'd be great to hear your thoughts, whether you agree with me or not. But if you've got the Novablast 3 and the Speed 3, or the Brooks Hyperion Max and the Speed 3, something like that, drop them in the comments below, let everyone know. I'd love to hear what you guys think, if you agree or not. That's it for this week's comparison, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do consider giving it a like and share it with your friends. Of course, consider subscribing to the channel for weekly running content. I'll see you on the next video for the Rosin 4 mile race. Until then.